That surveillance footage better be deleted by midnight or I'm pressing charges for invasion of privacy, screamed Patricia directly into my face, her perfectly manicured finger stabbing the air inches from my nose. I stood there in my driveway at 7:42 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, still holding my coffee mug, watching this woman I barely knew threaten me over the Ring doorbell camera I'd installed just 48 hours earlier. Her lawyer husband stood behind her in his Mercedes, engine running, late for court but apparently willing to witness whatever this performance was supposed to accomplish. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was being recorded by 3 different neighborhood security cameras while demanding I stop recording, each device capturing her meltdown in crystal clear 4K resolution that would later become Exhibit A in court documents. My property deed, still fresh from the title company, showed this half-acre lot in Westbrook Hills, Colorado, sat exactly 200 feet outside the Ridgemont Estates HOA boundary line, a fact verified by 2 independent surveyors and the county assessor's office. 15 years as a licensed architect had taught me to verify property lines before closing, which meant her recorded tantrum at my doorstep would become perfect documentation for the restraining order my attorney was already drafting. The security camera installation had taken exactly 43 minutes the previous Sunday afternoon. I'd mounted the Ring doorbell beside my front entrance, positioned a Nest camera covering the driveway, and installed motion-activated floodlights along the property perimeter. Everything wireless, everything cloud-connected, everything legally installed on property I'd owned for exactly 9 days. The real estate closing had happened on October 12th, 2024, a Friday afternoon transaction that transferred ownership of a 1,970 seconds ranch house on a generous lot with mountain views and no homeowner association restrictions. Patricia Whitmore had appeared at my property line approximately 6 hours after the moving truck departed. I was unpacking kitchen boxes when I noticed her standing in my driveway, clutching an iPad against her chest like some kind of digital shield, watching me through the front window with the intensity of someone conducting surveillance. She wore athleisure wear that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, designer sunglasses perched on highlighted hair that screamed, "I'd like to speak to the manager from across the street." I'd waved politely through the window, assuming she was a neighbor coming to introduce herself. Instead, she'd knocked sharply on my door, waited approximately 4 seconds, then knocked again with increasing urgency like the house was on fire and she needed to alert me immediately. "You can't park that trailer in the driveway," she announced the moment I opened the door. Not bothering with introductions or welcome to the neighborhood pleasantries, Section 7.3 of the Community Guidelines prohibits commercial vehicles and recreational trailers in visible locations. You'll need to move it to an approved storage facility immediately. Her voice carried that particular tone people use when they're accustomed to being obeyed without question. I looked past her at my completely dead, empty driveway, then back at her face, searching for signs of confusion or maybe early onset dementia. I don't own a trailer. That driveway hasn't had anything in it except the moving truck, which left hours ago. She held up her iPad, displaying a photo of someone else's property 3 streets over where a boat trailer sat beside a garage. This violation was reported this morning, and the property records show you as the new owner of 1,847 Pinewood Drive. "This is 1,847 Oakmont Court," I said slowly, pointing at the house numbers beside my door. "Different street entirely. You might want to check your address before issuing citations." For exactly 3 seconds, uncertainty flickered across her face, quickly replaced by something harder. "Well, regardless, you should familiarize yourself with community standards. We maintain certain aesthetic expectations in this neighborhood." She handed me a printed packet, professionally bound with a cover page reading, "Ridgemont Estates Community Guidelines, Mandatory Compliance Required." I flipped through pages of regulations covering everything from acceptable paint colors to approved mailbox designs, grass height requirements, and prohibited exterior modifications. The level of detail was impressive, bordering on obsessive. "These are interesting," I said carefully, but according to my title documents, this property isn't part of Ridgemont Estates. I'm outside your HOA boundaries. Her expression hardened into something resembling concrete. That's impossible. This entire development falls under HOA jurisdiction. You must have misread your paperwork. I'm an architect, I replied. Reading property documents is literally my job. This lot was subdivided before your HOA was established in 2008. The county records are very clear. I pulled out my phone and showed her the digital survey map, highlighting the boundary lines in yellow marker. The Ridgemont Estates HOA territory ended exactly 200 feet east of my property line. Patricia stared at the screen like it had personally insulted her, then back at my face with an expression suggesting I'd somehow fabricated official county documents just to avoid her authority. We'll need to verify that with the HOA board. Until then, you should consider yourself subject to community standards as a courtesy to your neighbors. I'll definitely be courteous, I said, but I won't be following regulations that don't apply to my property. Have a good evening. I closed the door gently, but firmly, watching through the window as she stood in my driveway for another full minute, apparently processing the concept that someone might exist beyond her jurisdiction. That had been 9 days ago. Since then, I'd installed security cameras, planted native wildflowers in the front yard beds, and started planning a workshop addition to the garage. Everything legal, everything permitted, everything completely outside Patricia Whitmore's authority. The cameras weren't about paranoia, they were about documentation. After 15 years dealing with difficult clients and contentious building projects, I'd learned that video evidence prevented he said, she said disputes and provided irrefutable records when conflicts escalated. The morning after installation, Patricia had materialized in my driveway again, this time accompanied by her husband Marcus, a corporate attorney whose BMW idled in the street like he had somewhere more important to be. She'd obviously prepared talking points overnight, transforming her disorganized anger into structured legal threats. Those cameras violate reasonable expectation of privacy, she announced, gesturing at the Ring doorbell like it was surveillance equipment aimed at her bedroom window. They're recording our property without consent, which constitutes unlawful monitoring under Colorado Revised Statutes, Section 189304. I sipped my coffee, letting her finish her prepared speech before responding. That statute covers recording private conversations without consent. These cameras monitor my own property and don't capture audio from the street, completely legal under both state law and the Fourth Circuit Court decision in United States v. Jackson. I'd done my homework the previous evening, researching relevant case law and verifying my installation complied with every applicable regulation. Marcus stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with his wife's escalating confrontation, but apparently obligated to support her position. We're simply requesting you angle those cameras away from the street to avoid capturing our activities when we pass by your house. They're pointed at my driveway and front entrance, I said. If you're walking down the public sidewalk, you have no expectation of privacy. That's established precedent in every jurisdiction in America. I gestured toward the street where at least 4 other houses had visible security cameras mounted in similar positions. Half your neighbors have identical systems recording the same public spaces. Patricia's face was cycling through interesting color variations, somewhere between frustrated red and angry crimson. This is harassment and targeted monitoring. We could sue for invasion of privacy and emotional distress. You could try, I agreed. But filing frivolous lawsuits against neighbors tends to backfire spectacularly. Ask me how I know from my experience with difficult clients who threatened legal action over imaginary grievances. I pulled out my phone and opened the Ring app, showing them the crystal clear footage of Patricia standing in my driveway, pointing at cameras, making legal threats while being recorded by multiple devices. This footage shows you on my private property making demands about my legally installed security system. That's not a strong foundation for a harassment claim. Marcus placed his hand on Patricia's shoulder, steering her back toward their idling BMW with the gentle pressure of someone accustomed to managing his wife's confrontations. "We'll be consulting with the HOA board about this situation. You haven't heard the last of this. Looking forward to it," I called after them, watching the Mercedes pull away with the kind of aggressive acceleration that suggested someone was very angry about something they couldn't control. Behind me, the Ring doorbell captured everything, automatically uploading to cloud storage, where it would remain accessible for 60 days, date-stamped and authenticated, perfect evidence for whatever came next. Mrs. Chen from across the street had been watching from her porch, coffee cup raised in a small salute of solidarity before she disappeared back inside. She'd lived in the neighborhood since before the HOA was established, her property also sitting outside their jurisdiction, and had apparently dealt with Patricia's overreach on multiple previous occasions. The first official violation notice appeared on my front door exactly 48 hours later, printed on professional letterhead that read, "Ridgemont Estates Homeowner Association Enforcement Division," in bold Times New Roman font. The document looked legitimate enough to fool anyone who didn't examine it closely, complete with case numbers, reference codes, and official-looking stamps that probably came from Office Depot. Notice of violation. Case number RME20241847. The header announced in alarming red text. Below that, 3 paragraphs of bureaucratic language detailing my alleged infractions. Unauthorized security camera installation without Architectural Review Committee approval. Non-compliant exterior lighting fixtures that exceeded approved lumen specifications, and unapproved landscaping modifications that violated community aesthetic standards. At the bottom, a signature line that might have been Patricia's name, accompanied by her self-designated title, HOA Enforcement Coordinator, Security and Aesthetics Division. The document demanded immediate removal of all violations within 72 hours or face escalating penalties starting at $500 per day plus potential legal action to compel compliance. I photographed the notice from multiple angles, capturing the lighting conditions, the tape residue on my door, the exact timestamp when I discovered it. Then I scanned the entire document into a PDF file, creating a digital archive that would survive any attempts to claim it never existed. The folder on my laptop labeled "Hey Harassment Documentation" was growing thicker with each passing day, organized chronologically with cross-references to supporting evidence and relevant statutes. The official Ridgemont Estates HOA website loaded slowly on my laptop, revealing a professionally designed page with stock photos of happy suburban families and carefully crafted language about maintaining community value through collective standards. Their actual letterhead used Calibri font, not Times New Roman. Their case numbers followed a completely different format. Most importantly, their board roster showed Patricia Whitmore listed as Member at Large with no enforcement authority whatsoever. I drafted an email to the HOA board president, a retired insurance adjuster named Robert Chin, who happened to be married to my coffee-saluting neighbor across the street. "Mr. Chen, I've received an unauthorized notice claiming to represent HOA enforcement actions against my property at 1847 Oakmont Court. As you're aware, this property sits outside your association boundaries and is not subject to your regulations. I'm documenting this harassment and will be filing complaints with appropriate authorities if it continues. Please confirm Patricia Whitmore has no official enforcement authority and instruct her to cease these activities immediately." The reply came back within 40 minutes, professionally worded but clearly concerned. "Mr. Morrison, thank you for bringing this to our attention. Mrs. Whitmore holds no enforcement authority within our association. The Architectural Review Committee was disbanded in 2019 due to lack of volunteer participation. Any notices claiming to represent official HOA actions from her should be disregarded and reported to our board immediately. We apologize for this confusion and will be addressing this matter internally." I forwarded Robert's email to my attorney. a sharp woman named Jennifer Park who specialized in property disputes and neighbor harassment cases. She'd handled several HOA conflicts during my career, usually defending homeowners against overzealous associations that exceeded their legal authority. This situation was slightly different since I wasn't even subject to their jurisdiction, which actually made Patricia's behavior more legally problematic. "This is textbook harassment," Jennifer said during our phone consultation that afternoon. "She's impersonating official authority, issuing fake legal documents, and attempting to enforce non-existent regulations against property she has no jurisdiction over. We could probably get a restraining order based on what you've documented so far, but let's see if she escalates first." Sometimes these situations resolve themselves once people realize they're being recorded and documented. That evening, I was reviewing architectural plans for a commercial project when headlights swept across my front window. A white SUV pulled into my driveway, and Patricia emerged carrying a professional-looking folder and what appeared to be a camera tripod. She was apparently conducting some kind of documentation mission, photographing my house from multiple angles while referring to notes in her folder. I grabbed my phone and stepped outside, activating the video recording function before approaching her at the property line. "Can I help you with something, Patricia?" She looked up from her camera with an expression suggesting I was interrupting important official business. "I'm conducting an architectural compliance inspection and documenting violations for the HOA board review. Your security cameras are positioned to monitor neighboring properties, which violates privacy expectations outlined in Community Standards Section 12.4. You're trespassing on my property while photographing my house without permission," I said calmly, keeping my phone's camera trained on her activities. "That's actually illegal in Colorado. The cameras you're complaining about are recording you committing an actual crime right now." She glanced at my phone, then at the Ring doorbell above my entrance, clearly calculating whether her documentation mission was worth the risk of being documented herself. The HOA board has authorized comprehensive compliance inspections of all properties in the development, including those that incorrectly believe they're outside our jurisdiction. Your property was subdivided from lots that were subject to HOA covenants, which means those restrictions transfer to subsequent owners. "That's completely false," I said, pulling out my phone to show her the title insurance document that explicitly stated the property was free and clear of any homeowner association covenants, restrictions, or obligations. The title company had done extensive research specifically because I'd asked them to verify the HOA status before closing. This property has never been subject to your association. Not when it was subdivided, not when previous owners held it, and not now that I own it. Patricia was scrolling through her own phone, apparently searching for some document that would support her position. We'll see what the attorneys say about that. The HOA board is prepared to file a lawsuit to establish our jurisdiction over this property and compel compliance with community standards. Your board president just sent me an email confirming you have no enforcement authority and that this property isn't in your jurisdiction? I replied, holding up my phone to show her Robert Chen's message with the HOA's official letterhead visible at the top. He also confirmed the Architectural Review Committee doesn't exist anymore, which means those violation notices you've been issuing are fraudulent legal documents. The color drained from her face as she realized I'd been communicating directly with the actual HOA leadership, completely bypassing her manufactured authority structure. She'd been operating under the assumption that I wouldn't verify her claims or check with the legitimate board members. That assumption had just exploded in her face, leaving her standing in my driveway with a camera and a folder full of fake documentation. "The board doesn't understand the full scope of the compliance issues," she said, but her voice had lost its earlier certainty. "Once I present my complete findings at the next board meeting, they'll authorize proper enforcement action against your violations. Patricia, you need to leave my property right now," I said, no longer keeping my tone friendly or neutral. "You're trespassing, you're harassing me, and you're impersonating official authority you don't possess. If you come onto my property again without permission, I'm calling the sheriff's office and filing criminal trespass charges." She gathered her camera equipment with movements that suggested she wanted to maintain dignity while executing a strategic retreat. this isn't over. The community has standards, and you don't get to ignore them just because you think some paperwork puts you above the rules that everyone else follows. I'm not above the rules, I said. I'm outside your jurisdiction entirely, which means your rules simply don't apply to me. There's a difference. I watched her load her equipment into the white SUV, documenting her departure with steady video footage that would add another chapter to my growing evidence file. After she left, I uploaded the video to my secure cloud storage and added it to the chronological timeline I was building. Every interaction, every document, every threat was being preserved and organized with the same attention to detail I applied to architectural projects. If this situation eventually required legal intervention, I wanted overwhelming documentation that would make Patricia's harassment undeniable and indefensible. The next escalation came 48 hours later in the form of certified mail, which immediately suggested Patricia had consulted an attorney or at least someone who understood how to create documents that looked more legitimate than her previous attempts. The envelope contained a cease and desist notice on letterhead reading Whitmore Legal Advocacy Services, LLC, with a Denver address that Google Maps revealed was actually a UPS store mailbox location. The letter was 3 pages of legal-sounding language demanding immediate removal of security cameras, threatening litigation for invasion of privacy, and claiming my property was subject to HOA jurisdiction through doctrine of implied covenant and equitable servitude. The signature line read, Marcus Whitmore, Esquire, Principal Attorney, followed by his Colorado Bar Association number, which at least confirmed he was an actual licensed lawyer, even if his firm name was apparently invented for this specific threatening letter. I forwarded the entire document to Jennifer Park, who called me back within 20 minutes, laughing hard enough that I could hear her struggling to maintain professional composure. Oh my God, Ryan, this is the most ridiculous cease and desist I've seen in 15 years of practice. He's threatening to sue you for invasion of privacy because your security cameras might record him walking past your house on a public sidewalk. That's not even remotely actionable. And the implied covenant argument is laughable when you've got title insurance explicitly stating there are no HOA restrictions. So I should ignore it? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Absolutely not, Jennifer said. We're going to respond with our own letter on my firm's letterhead, explaining exactly why every claim in this document is baseless and potentially sanctionable if they actually try to file a lawsuit. Then we're going to include copies of your property documents, the HOA board president's email, and a polite suggestion that Mr. Whitmore reconsider using his law license to threaten neighbors over imaginary violations. Jennifer's response letter arrived at the UPS store mailbox 3 days later and apparently had its intended effect. The harassment stopped completely for exactly 11 days. No more driveway confrontations, no more fake violation notices, no more photography expeditions. I actually started to believe the situation had resolved itself through basic application of legal reality and documented evidence. Then, Patricia hired the enforcement company, and everything escalated into territory I hadn't anticipated. 3 men showed up on a Wednesday morning driving a white cargo van with magnetic door signs reading, Community Standards Enforcement, Professional Compliance Services. They wore matching navy polo shirts embroidered with the same company name, carried clipboards and digital cameras, and approached my property line with the confident swagger of people who believed they had legitimate authority. The tallest man knocked on my front door while the other 2 began photographing my house from multiple angles, documenting what they apparently believed were violations requiring immediate attention. I watched them through my window for exactly 30 seconds, recording their activities on my phone, before opening the door to find out what fresh nonsense Patricia had orchestrated. Good morning, sir. We're with Community Standards Enforcement, contracted by the Ridgemont Estates Homeowner Association to conduct compliance inspections and document violations of architectural guidelines. The tall man extended a business card that looked professionally printed with a Denver phone number and an email address using a Gmail domain. We've received multiple complaints about your property and need to verify compliance with community standards. Let me see your business license and liability insurance," I said, not accepting his card. "Also, I'll need documentation of your contract with the HOA and proof that you're authorized to conduct inspections on private property." The three men exchanged glances that suggested they hadn't expected to encounter resistance from someone who understood how legitimate compliance inspections actually worked. The tall man pulled out his phone and scrolled through some documents. "We're authorized by the HOA board to enforce community standards and issue citations for non-compliant properties. Your security cameras violate Section 8.2 regarding external surveillance equipment, and your landscaping modifications haven't been approved by the Architectural Review Committee." "The Architectural Review Committee doesn't exist," I said. "It was disbanded in 2019, and this property isn't subject to HOA jurisdiction anyway. Which means you have absolutely no authority to be here conducting inspections or issuing citations." I pulled out my own phone and opened the recording app, making sure the red indicator light was visible. "What company did you say you work for?" The second man stepped forward, shorter and stockier, with the kind of build that suggested he'd done construction work before moving into whatever this enforcement business was supposed to be. "We're contracted professionals hired to ensure community compliance. The specifics of our authorization are confidential between us and the HOA board." "That's interesting," I said, "because I've been in direct contact with the HOA board president, and he's confirmed that no enforcement company has been hired, that the Architectural Review Committee doesn't exist, and that Patricia Whitmore has no authority to issue violations or hire contractors on behalf of the association." I showed them Robert Chen's email on my phone screen. "So, unless you can provide legitimate documentation of your authority, you're trespassing on private property while claiming false credentials." The third man had wandered onto my property during this conversation. Getting close enough to my workshop addition plans to photograph the permit documents posted in the window, that was the moment they crossed from annoying, but legal, into actually criminal territory. "You need to step off my property immediately," I said, my voice dropping into the register I used for contractors who ignored safety protocols. "You have no right to be here, and you're currently trespassing." The tall man pulled out what looked like an official credential card, laminated plastic with his photo and the company name. "We have authorization to inspect properties and document violations. This credential gives us the authority to conduct compliance investigations on behalf of contracted homeowner associations." "Who issued that credential?" I asked, taking photos of the card from multiple angles. "What government agency oversees your certification?" Because in Colorado, there's no such thing as private enforcement officers with authority to inspect private property without owner consent. The silence that followed was exactly the sound of people realizing their manufactured authority was about to collapse under basic questioning. The tall man looked at his partners, both of whom had stopped photographing and were clearly reevaluating their involvement in whatever Patricia had hired them to do. "We're going to need to contact our client for clarification," the tall man said finally, backing toward his van with movements that suggested he wanted to exit this situation before it deteriorated further. "We'll return once we've confirmed our authorization documentation. Don't come back without a warrant or my permission," I said clearly, still recording. "Next time you step onto my property without authorization, I'm calling the sheriff's office and filing criminal trespass charges against all three of you." I watched them load into their van and drive away, their magnetic door sign slightly crooked from hasty attachment. The business card the tall man had tried to give me sat on my doorstep where I'd refused to accept it. I photographed it in place, then picked it up wearing latex gloves from my workshop, preserving potential fingerprints in case this evidence became relevant in a criminal investigation. The Colorado Secretary of State business database showed no registered entity called Community Standards Enforcement or Professional Compliance Services. The phone number on their business card went to a Google voicemail that said, "Leave a message and we'll get back to you regarding your compliance matter." The email address had been created 6 days earlier according to Gmail's creation date metadata. Jennifer, Park added fraud and impersonation of government officials to the list of potential charges when I forwarded her the photos and video documentation. Ryan, this has gone way beyond annoying neighbor harassment. Patricia hired people to impersonate official enforcement officers and conduct fake inspections on your property. That's a felony in Colorado. We need to contact the sheriff's office immediately and file a formal complaint. The Arapahoe County Sheriff's Office took my complaint seriously, especially after I showed them the video footage of 3 men claiming enforcement authority while conducting inspections on private property without consent. Deputy Martinez listened to my statement, reviewed the documentation I'd compiled, and made several phone calls to verify the non-existence of any legitimate enforcement company matching the description. Mr. Morrison, what you've documented here is criminal impersonation of public officials under Colorado Revised Statute 188112, Deputy Martinez said, adding notes to his incident report. These men claimed authority they don't possess to conduct official inspections on your property. That's a Class 6 felony. We'll need to identify who hired them and determine if this was an isolated incident or part of a broader pattern. I provided Patricia Whitmore's name and address, along with all the previous harassment documentation I'd been compiling for weeks. The deputy's expression shifted from professional interest to something approaching disbelief as he reviewed the fake violation notices, the cease and desist letter from her husband, and the escalating pattern of confrontations all captured on video. This is one of the most thoroughly documented neighbor harassment cases I've ever seen. Deputy Martinez said, organizing my evidence files into his investigation folder, "You've essentially done half our job already. We'll be interviewing Mrs. Whitmore and these enforcement company individuals. I expect we'll have probable cause for arrest warrants on multiple charges." The arrest happened 3 days later, quietly and professionally, with none of the dramatic confrontation that Patricia probably would have preferred. Deputy Martinez and 2 other officers appeared at her door on Friday evening, executed the warrant, and transported her to county jail for booking on charges of criminal impersonation, harassment, fraud, and criminal conspiracy. Bond was set at $15,000, which her attorney husband paid immediately, bringing her home within 4 hours of arrest. But the damage was done. The arrest was a matter of public record, searchable in the county database, visible to anyone who cared to look. The Ridgemont Estates HOA board called an emergency meeting to address what their official minutes diplomatically described as recent unauthorized enforcement activities conducted by a board member acting outside approved authority. The community center had never been so packed for an HOA meeting. Every folding chair was occupied by 6:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the scheduled start time, with residents standing along the walls and spilling into the hallway. Word had spread through neighborhood social media groups faster than wildfire, fueled by Ring doorbell footage, screenshots of Patricia's arrest record, and the kind of dramatic speculation that only comes when everyone knows they're about to witness something extraordinary. I arrived at 7 p.m. carrying a briefcase filled with documentation that had expanded considerably since the arrests. Police reports, criminal complaints, recorded confessions from the fake enforcement officers who'd cooperated with investigators in exchange for reduced charges, video footage from multiple angles, and a complete timeline of harassment stretching back to my first day in the neighborhood. The HOA board president called the meeting to order with visible nervousness, shuffling through prepared remarks that had probably been reviewed by the association's attorney multiple times to avoid creating additional legal liability. Robert Chen was a reasonable man who'd been elected to a volunteer position that should have involved reviewing paint color requests and organizing the annual neighborhood garage sale. Instead, he was now managing the fallout from criminal charges and potential civil liability that could bankrupt the association. We're here to address recent events involving unauthorized enforcement activities conducted by a board member, Robert began carefully. The board wants to make absolutely clear that these actions were not approved by this association and do not represent our policies or procedures. His prepared statement was designed to create legal distance between the statement HOA and Patricia's criminal behavior, protecting the organization from lawsuits while throwing her completely under the bus. A hand shot up from the middle of the room. Are we talking about Patricia getting arrested? Because everyone's seen the mugshot online and we want to know what the hell was going on. The questioner was a retired school teacher named Margaret Sullivan, who'd lived in Ridgemont Estates since it was developed and wasn't afraid to ask direct questions when situations demanded direct answers. Robert looked toward the back of the room where I could see 2 local news crews setting up cameras. The arrest of a suburban homeowner for harassing her neighbor with fake enforcement officers was apparently newsworthy enough to warrant local television coverage. Mrs. Whitmore was arrested on charges related to impersonating enforcement officials and issuing fraudulent violation notices. Robert said, she was not acting on behalf of this association and had no authority to hire private contractors or conduct enforcement activities. I stood up, raising my hand to request the floor. The room fell silent as people turned to look at the person who'd been at the center of this entire bizarre situation. I'd like to address the community about what happened and provide documentation that explains how this situation escalated from neighbor harassment to criminal charges. Robert nodded, clearly relieved that someone else was willing to explain the complicated series of events that had led to arrests and media attention. Mr. Morrison, please proceed. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a folder thick with police reports, surveillance footage, stills, and documented evidence. 3 weeks ago, I purchased a home at 1847 Oakmont Court, which sits outside the HOA boundaries according to county records, title documents, and independent surveys. Within hours of moving in, Patricia Whitmore began issuing fake violation notices, claiming enforcement authority she didn't possess, and threatening legal action to force compliance with regulations that don't apply to my property. The murmur that rippled through the room carried equal parts shock, and I knew something was wrong. Energy. People were pulling out phones, probably searching for property maps to verify the boundary claims I'd just made. The television cameras captured every reaction, every whispered conversation, every moment of growing realization that their neighbor had committed serious crimes over imaginary jurisdiction. She issued multiple fraudulent violation notices on fake HOA letterhead, had her attorney husband send threatening cease and desist letters, trespassed on my property multiple times, and finally hired 3 men to impersonate enforcement officials and conduct fake compliance inspections. I distributed copies of key documents to board members, making sure the television cameras captured the official-looking fake notices and credentials. Every interaction was recorded on security cameras. Every document was preserved and authenticated. When those fake enforcement officers were arrested and interrogated, they provided investigators with complete information about who hired them, how much they were paid, and what specific instructions Patricia gave them. Someone in the back shouted, "How much did she pay them?" The question was both reasonable and damning, reducing Patricia's criminal conspiracy to a quantifiable transaction. According to their statements to investigators, Patricia paid them $1,200 to conduct the fake inspection and issue violation notices. I said, she provided them with laminated credential cards, professional-looking business cards, and specific instructions about what to say and document, all of which she purchased online using her personal credit card, creating a perfect paper trail that investigators found immediately. The room erupted in conversations, people turning to neighbors with expressions ranging from shock to vindication. Patricia Whitmore had been widely known as the self-appointed enforcement coordinator who patrolled the neighborhood looking for violations, but apparently few residents realized she'd crossed from annoying busybody into actual criminal behavior. Robert Chen held up his hands for quiet, trying to restore order to a meeting that had transformed from routine HOA business into something resembling a town hall confrontation. The board has reviewed Mr. Morrison's documentation and consulted with our attorney, Mrs. Whitmore has been removed from all board positions, banned from future HOA participation, and we're cooperating fully with law enforcement investigations. What about lawsuits? Someone asked from the side of the room. Can he sue the HOA because of what she did? Jennifer Park stood up from where she'd been sitting in the back, identifying herself as my attorney and providing a brief statement. Mr. Morrison has no intention of suing the Ridgemont Estates HOA. Your board president acted appropriately once he learned about these activities, and the association is clearly not responsible for unauthorized criminal behavior by a rogue board member. However, Mrs. Whitmore will be facing significant civil liability for harassment, emotional distress, and legal fees. We'll be filing a civil complaint next week seeking damages and permanent injunctive relief. The meeting continued for another 90 minutes, with residents asking questions, reviewing documentation, and expressing varying degrees of shock and outrage about what had been happening in their community. Several people approached me afterward to apologize for Patricia's behavior and express relief that someone had finally documented and stopped her harassment campaign. Mrs. Chen brought me a cup of coffee and spoke quietly near the refreshment table. She's been doing this for years, you know. Issuing fake violations, threatening people, claiming authority she never had. Most people just gave in or moved away rather than fighting back. Thank you for actually standing up to her and documenting everything properly. The local news coverage that evening was remarkably accurate, avoiding the usual sensationalism in favor of straightforward reporting about a homeowner arrested for impersonating enforcement officials and harassing her neighbor. My doorbell camera footage played in the background while reporters explained property boundaries and the difference between HOA jurisdiction and individual property rights. Patricia's mugshot appeared on screen, followed by exterior shots of both our houses with property lines highlighted in graphics. The story gained traction on social media, getting picked up by regional news networks and eventually appearing in a national Reddit thread about HOA horror stories. My carefully documented evidence became an example of how to handle neighbor harassment. Record everything, verify all claims, maintain detailed documentation, and involve law enforcement when criminal behavior occurs. 6 weeks after the arrests, I was putting the finishing touches on my workshop addition when the mail carrier delivered a thick envelope from the Arapahoe County District Attorney's Office. Patricia Whitmore had accepted a plea agreement, pleading guilty to criminal impersonation and harassment in exchange for dropping the fraud and conspiracy charges. Her sentence included 2 years of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory anger management counseling, a permanent restraining order prohibiting any contact with me, and restitution for my legal fees, totaling $8,400. The civil lawsuit settlement came 2 weeks later, negotiated by Jennifer Park with Patricia's insurance company after they reviewed the overwhelming documentation and determined their client had no defensible position. The settlement amount was confidential, but substantial enough to cover all my actual damages, future legal protection, and what Jennifer called meaningful consequences to discourage any thoughts of future harassment. The for sale sign appeared in Patricia and Marcus Whitmore's yard on the same day the settlement was finalized. They'd apparently decided that remaining in a neighborhood where everyone knew about the arrests, the charges, and the complete collapse of Patricia's manufactured authority was untenable. The realtor told neighbors they were relocating for Marcus's work, but everyone understood the real reason for the sudden departure. I spent a Saturday afternoon planting a garden bed along my property line, exactly where Patricia had stood issuing her first fake violation notice about a trailer that never existed. Native Colorado wildflowers, bee-friendly perennials, and ornamental grasses that would thrive in our climate and require minimal maintenance. The symbolism wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. The workshop edition was completed in early December, in, if you say, passing all inspections with the kind of straightforward approval that comes from properly permitted construction on property with clear title. The building inspector, a veteran of 30 years reviewing residential projects, mentioned he'd heard about the HOA situation and appreciated seeing someone who understood the importance of following actual rules rather than imaginary regulations. "You did this exactly right," he said, signing off on the final inspection paperwork. "Verified your property status before closing, documented everything when harassment started, involved law enforcement when it became criminal. Most people just argue and escalate without building evidence. You built a case instead of just fighting back. The security cameras remained in place, continuing their silent documentation of a driveway that stayed peaceful after Patricia's departure. New neighbors moved into her house in February, a young couple with a toddler who introduced themselves pleasantly and showed no interest in anyone else's property or business. The neighborhood dynamics shifted subtly, with the previous atmosphere of surveillance and citation hunting replaced by something approaching normal suburban coexistence. Robert Chen stopped by one evening with a bottle of wine and an informal update about HOA reforms. The board had implemented new policies requiring attorney review of all enforcement actions, explicit documentation of authority before any violation notices could be issued, and mandatory training for board members about the actual limits of HOA jurisdiction and power. What Patricia did was a wake-up call for everyone, Robert said, sitting on my completed workshop porch while the sun set behind the mountains. We'd gotten complacent about governance and oversight, assuming board members understood their actual authority. Your documentation and the resulting criminal charges forced us to confront how badly things can go wrong when volunteer positions become power trips. I poured wine into the glasses he'd brought, appreciating both the gesture and the honest reflection. The structure you've implemented sounds reasonable. Clear authority, documented procedures, legal review before enforcement. That's how functional organizations operate. We've actually had several properties outside our boundaries that were being issued violation notices, Robert admitted. After your situation, we reviewed all our enforcement records and discovered Patricia had been doing this for almost 3 years, just targeting anyone she decided wasn't maintaining her standards, regardless of whether they were actually in the HOA. We've been sending apology letters and refunding improper fines all month. The twilight deepened as we sat there. Two suburban homeowners discussing the delicate balance between community standards and individual property rights. The conversation was remarkably civil, considering the criminal charges and legal battles that had brought us together. But that was the benefit of proper documentation and legitimate authority. It separated personal conflicts from institutional governance, allowing relationships to exist on their actual merits rather than manufactured power dynamics. My phone buzzed with a notification from the Ring doorbell, showing an Amazon delivery driver dropping a package at my front door. The camera captured her walking back to her truck, exactly as designed, monitoring my property without invading anyone's privacy or violating any actual regulations. Technology working as intended, legal and proper, and completely unremarkable. Your cameras ever cause problems with the new neighbors? Robert asked, gesturing toward the devices mounted around my property. They introduced themselves by asking what brand I used because they wanted to install the same system, I said. Apparently, having documented security is considered normal in their previous neighborhood. Imagine that. Robert laughed, the kind of genuine amusement that only comes from recognizing absurdity in hindsight. Patricia treated security cameras like they were espionage equipment. Meanwhile, half the neighborhood has Ring doorbells and nobody else cares. Control, I said simply. She couldn't control what the cameras recorded, which meant she couldn't control the narrative about what happened. People who need to control everything tend to panic when they encounter systems designed to document reality. The wine bottle emptied as we talked through the evening, covering topics ranging from property values to the psychology of HOA, power dynamics, to the importance of actually reading title documents before closing. When Robert finally headed home around 9 p.m., we'd established something approaching friendship, built on mutual respect and the shared experience of surviving an absurd situation through proper procedures. Inside my workshop, the new tools were organized on pegboard walls, each item hanging in its designated place with the kind of precise arrangement that makes finding things efficient and satisfying. The space smelled of fresh lumber and paint, ready for projects that had been delayed during months of dealing with harassment and legal proceedings. I pulled out the banker's box that held all my Patricia documentation, considering whether to keep it or dispose of it now that legal matters were resolved. The folders were labeled chronologically: initial contact, fake violations, trespass incidents, fake enforcement officers, arrests, legal proceedings, settlement. Together, they told a complete story of harassment escalating to criminal behavior and, finally, to consequences, all documented with the thoroughness of someone who understood that evidence determines outcomes. The box would stay, filed in my home office closet alongside other important records, not because I expected future problems, but because preserving institutional memory prevents repeating historical mistakes. 15 years as an architect had taught me that documentation serves multiple purposes. It protects against liability, it creates accountability, it establishes truth in disputes, and it educates future participants about what happened and why it mattered. My laptop held digital copies of everything, backed up to 3 different cloud services with encryption and redundancy that would survive any imaginable disaster. The video footage sat on Ring's servers and my personal archives, time-stamped and authenticated, available for review if anyone ever questioned what actually happened. The paper trail connected through law enforcement records, court documents, title insurance, and HOA meeting minutes, creating an unbreakable chain of documented reality that would outlast any attempt at revisionist storytelling. The garden bed along the property line would bloom in spring, native wildflowers attracting pollinators and adding color to a space that had witnessed so much conflict. The workshop would host projects both practical and creative, giving me space to work on designs and builds without interruption or harassment. The security cameras would continue recording, capturing nothing more dramatic than deliveries and weather and the normal rhythm of suburban life. Good boundaries make good neighbors, but good documentation makes justice possible. Patricia Whitmore had learned that lesson the hard way, through arrests and charges and public humiliation and financial consequences. The community had learned it through reforms and policies and the recognition that volunteer authority requires actual oversight. I'd learned it through experience, watching manufactured power collapse when confronted with documented reality and legitimate legal process. The mountains behind my house glowed purple in the fading light, solid and permanent and completely indifferent to human drama. Tomorrow, I'd start designing a pergola for the back patio, creating shade and structure in a space that finally felt peaceful and protected. The plans would be properly drawn, appropriately permitted, and built to code, just like everything else on property that belonged to me without restriction or interference. Inside the workshop, my laptop displayed the settlement agreement with its confidential terms and permanent restrictions preventing future contact. The document represented closure, not just legally but psychologically, marking the end of a conflict that should never have started but needed to conclude properly. Justice doesn't always announce itself with fanfare, but it arrives methodically, building one documented fact at a time until the foundation is strong enough to support whatever comes next. I locked the workshop and walked back toward the house, passing the garden bed where wildflowers would soon grow, crossing the property line that had been verified by surveyors and documented in county records and defended through legal proceedings. The land was mine, the boundaries were clear, and the authority to determine what happened here belonged to me alone, subject only to legitimate regulations and actual law. The Ring doorbell captured my entry, adding one more timestamp to an archive that documented life rather than conflict, normal routines rather than harassment. The cameras would keep recording, but now they captured nothing more interesting than a homeowner living peacefully on property he owned, building projects he designed, and maintaining boundaries he'd earned the right to protect. Good fences make good neighbors. Good documentation makes justice possible. And good boundaries, properly established and legitimately defended, make everything else unnecessary.